Shalom everyone. I'm very eager to get started because I have a lot to share with you, and it's going to be in 3 parts. The first part you will really like. The second part you will love. The third part you'll think is fantastic. So that's why I want to get through all. I'm asking Jovanas to make a copy of this little these sheets for everybody. It looks like it's a lot, but it is a lot, but we can go through it quickly. Barbara suggests I give a quick introduction. So to start the introduction, this is my introduction. Jonava. My father of blessed memory was born and raised in Jonava. And I don't know what made him smarter than his older brothers who studied in the Slobodki yeshiva and became rabbis. They all perished in the Holocaust, their wives, their children, their in-laws. But my father left in the 1920s, and he joined 2 sisters who had been in America, and they had 1 younger brother who made his way to Palestine, and they survived. And because of that, I'm here. I never wanted to go to Lithuania because all I could think of is that it's the place where my father's family was put to death. And that's before I knew as much as I know now about that. But many, many years later, after I became a rabbi, I was attending a Chanukah party in San Diego, and I met a beautiful young woman who had an accent, and I love accents. My father always taught me, don't respect someone that lives in a big house, have a big car, expect their intellect. This man, he speaks 9 languages, he speaks 4 languages, he speaks 8 languages. So I always paid attention to accents. I said to this woman, you have an accent, where are you from? She said, Lithuania. I said, Lithuania? You're the first person I ever met from Lithuania. Are you Jewish? Yes. That's why I'm at a Chanukah party. She ultimately introduced me to a friend of hers from Lithuania, and that's Rimas. And Rimas and Ida said, you have to come to Lithuania. And I said, no. And they kept saying, you have to come. But Rimas kept saying, you have to, Moshe, come. Finally, one day, I was in Berlin, close enough. I came, and I met Jovanas right from the airport. And to Jovanas Yeva, and from Yeva, Anupras and Mikey, and I found my brother and sister in this family, and I'm thrilled to be here. So this is really exciting stuff. I did not want to talk about the subject. I had in mind to talk about some politics and the changing American Jewry and things like that, etc. Jovanas says, no, I want you to speak about something that's going to excite people, bring them here. Sex and Judaism. Sex and Judaism? No. Anyway, he says, do it. You can speak the next time about politics. So, here it is. Barbara, you help me put it out? By the way, the interesting thing is this picture of a man saying Kaddish at the cemetery in Jonava. That is what my father looked like. This could be my father's twin brother. He also wore those hats.
Yes.
And he was at that mustache.
But did he have a twin brother?
Okay. So, I want to cover 3 subjects. What does Judaism have to say about polygamy or monogamy? Does Judaism believe strongly it should be 1 man, 1 woman? Or does it say, well, 1 man, as many women as he can get his hands on? The second subject I want to discuss is, how does Judaism treat sexuality? Is it something to be open about, to enjoy, to be proud of, to write about, to sing about? Or is it something to be hidden about and quiet and downplayed and repressed? And the third subject is, what does Judaism have to say about women and the role and the status of women vis-a-vis men? 3 different subjects. What does Judaism have to say about the 3 of them? Okay, let's take the first. Polygamy versus monogamy. Now, the Jewish Bible does not say things specifically about polygamy because it took it for granted. Abraham was polygamous, Isaac, Jacob, and so it's one man, one woman. It goes all the way through the heroes and the kings, particularly with the kings. And here's an example of what it says about the marital status of King Solomon. Would somebody please read the first section from 1 Kings, chapter 11, verse 1 to 7, about King Solomon. Anybody? Volunteer for this because all the rest of them are longer. This is the short one. Good. Can somebody please read it out loud? Barbara, go ahead.
Okay. King Solomon loved many foreign women in addition to Pharaoh's daughter. Moabite, Amalekite, Edomite, Phoenician, and Hittite women. He had 700 royal wives and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. In his old age, his wives turned away Solomon's heart after other gods.
So, the Bible is telling us Solomon had 1,000 women in his life, and the only reason it mentions it is not with any condemnation of having so many wives, but rather the concern of the Bible that these wives talked him out of his faithfulness to God, to the God of Israel, that they had an impact on his religious worship. What they meant by that was that all these Canaanite wives came with their religions, and they had an influence on Solomon. But polygamy is taken for granted. Bob, keep reading the next line. The next line is from Rabbi David Blythe. He is a contemporary Orthodox scholar, and he makes the following comment.
Polygamy is not banned by Scripture, but was forbidden among Western Jews following an edict prescribing plural marriages promulgated in approximately the year 1000 by the renowned Ashkenazic authority Rabbeinu Gershom.
Rabbeinu Gershom was one of the luminaries in Jewish life in Europe and in Germany. And approximately the year 1000, he ruled that Judaism no longer will permit polygamy. That from that time on, Jewish men can only marry one woman, at a time. So why did he come up with that edict? He's making it very clear, polygamy is permissible. So what influenced him to actually prohibit polygamy? Take a guess. And the guess is Ashkenaz. He's from Ashkenaz, from Germany. The hint is that it was not a prohibition for, what's the other main element of the Jewish community? That's not Ashkenaz. Is what?
Sfarad.
Sephardi. This was not an edict on Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews never got this rule that you can't be polygamous. It was a rule in the Ashkenazic community from Rabbeinu Gershom. Why? Why did he prohibit it, and why did the Sephardics not prohibit it? Second hint, the Sephardics were living in predominantly Muslim countries. The Ashkenazim were living in predominantly Christian countries. Why did he prohibit it? because it was looked down on by the Christians. He was living in a Christian society. The Christians looked down. Look at these Jews, primitive. Look at the way they behave. They live like, some like a tribal group in who knows where in Africa. Sephardic Jews did not have that problem because all around them were the Muslim community, which was polygamous and still is polygamous. Crisis, 1950. Jews start coming to the newfound state of Israel. We're just celebrating the 75th birthday. 1950, Jews are starting to come from Yemen. The people from the immigration office come to welcome them. And all of a sudden they see this man coming down from the airplane. And with him, 2 wives, 3 wives, 4 wives. What's going on here? Their response was, don't bother me, I'm not Ashkenazi. We don't have a prohibition against this. And the state of Israel had 2 choices. One choice was to be faithful to Rabbi Gershom. He issued his proclamation for 1,000 years. In what year did he issue it? In the year 1000, which means that the prohibition is over in the year 2000. 3 years ago, 3 years and 4 months ago, that prohibition was over. So one possibility is they could have said, let's wait a little longer, and then we can all be polygamists. No. The Knesset made a different ruling. If a man is already married to more than one wife, he stays married to more than one wife. But he cannot take any more. And if he's single and decides to get married, he can marry only one wife. In Israel, that's not a religious law, it's a civil law. So that's the status of polygamy. Now I want to contrast that with monogamy in Judaism, because actually Judaism officially permits polygamy. Take a look at the next section. Creation of men and woman, Adam and Eve. I need somebody to read this just right through. But not to yourself, out loud. Okay, you got it.
When no shrub of the field was yet on earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there were no human beings to till the soil. God settled the human in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. God said, it is not...
So, let's make it clear. This is the 2nd chapter of Genesis, talking about the creation of Adam. And the statement here is that God did not plant anything on the earth because there wasn't a man to take care of it. He needed somebody to do the work. So he goes and creates this man, scoops up some clay, makes a man, breathes life into him, and says, okay, now I have the person who's going to work the land, who's going to take care of it. All right. So, the man is created. Yeah, let's go on, please.
God settled the human in the Garden of Eden to till the earth. And God said, it is not good for the human to be alone. I will make a fitting counterpart for him. And God formed out of the earth all the wild beasts and the birds of the sky, and brought them to the human to see what he would call them. And whatever the human called each living creature, that would be its name. And the human gave names to all the cattle, and to the birds of the sky, and to all the wild beasts, but no fitting counterpart for a human being was found. So God cast a deep sleep upon the human, and while he slept, God took one of his sides and closed up the flesh at that side. And God fashioned the side that had been taken from the human into a woman, bringing her to the human. Then the human said, "This one is the last firstborn of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for a human was she taken. Hence a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, so that they become one flesh."
Okay. So here is the story of the creation of a man and a woman in the second chapter of the Torah in the book of Genesis. What does this story tell us? What is the agenda of this story? We're not saying it's originally a Jewish story, because all these narratives and stories in the Bible came from Mesopotamia, Babylonia, Yuga, Ugaritic, all these different ancient Near Eastern cultures. But this is the story that they told, at least it's found in the second chapter. What does this story convey? What values does it convey?
Why we are here.
But because I'm hearing impaired, it's another reason I want to be even closer. You'll have to speak, I don't know how. Keep in mind that I don't hear
the reason is maybe that humans want to know why we are here.
Yeah.
How did everything start?
The purpose of the story is to tell us why we are here.
Yes.
Why we are here, to work the earth. Right? That's very good, because the first chapter does not portray human beings created to do any work. It's this chapter, this story that says God needed a gardener. He's going to plant trees and bushes and so on, and needs somebody to take care of it. And he's not going to do it because he's the landowner. So human beings are here to work the earth. What about the relationship of male and female, of men and women? What does the story tell us about that?
It says that the male was before the woman.
Czyli wynegocjuj.
Man is created
Nie girdi
first.
žmogus.
And why is the woman created? Why didn't he just create a man
Yes.
to do the job, take care of the earth? According to this story.
It needed the
What?
needed the counterpart.
You're using the word counterpart. I don't know that that's a correct description, but you are correct that this man missed something. He needed something. Why did he need something? He was lonely.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
He needs a partner. Counterpart. It's a very hard to translate the Hebrew word for this. Ezer kenegdo. A helpmeet alongside him, or a helper opposite him. But you're correct. This man is able to do the job, but he needs to be with somebody else. So what does God do? He brings all these animals and so on, and he says, here's some company. You know, come on, you want a dog? I got a dog. You want a horse? I got a horse. What do you want? I got everything. He brings it to the man. The man says, something's missing. This is not for me. This is not for me. I'll give them a name. I'll buy them dog food. I'll ride the horse, but it's not enough. What's missing? What is it that the man does not get from these animals that he's going to get after God puts him to sleep and creates a woman?
Yeah.
What is he going to get?
Children.
A sexual partner.
Yes.
He's rejecting the animals because the value of the storyteller is don't sleep with animals. By the way, this probably shouldn't be on the video, but you can understand there are certain cultures where shepherds and what have you, are spending all their time with animals. They can get involved in what's called bestiality, sexual relations with animals. And the storyteller here is not in favor of that. Clearly, they are not acceptable. So what is acceptable? He puts this man to sleep, takes a rib, creates a woman, and how does the man respond? What does he say? You can go back and look at it again if you want to. It says, this one,
This one
at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was from human, she was taken. Okay. Look at that last line. This is the last line in that chapter. Hence a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife so that they become one flesh. Is this the point of view of a polygamist? No! It's the point of view of a monogamist. Whoever was writing or telling and sharing the story was a believer in a man and a woman together become one. And they become one through the sexual act that he could not share with the animals. So it's very much of a monogamous story. There were Bible scholars about 20, 25 years ago who were trying to determine who are the authors of the different strains of the Bible, and one of the major conclusions was that the origin of this strain of the Bible was female. That this is a woman telling the story. Not 100% convincing, because if the woman was telling the story, she might have had, she's created first, she goes to sleep, and the man comes from her rib. Because what's taken away from women in this story, in the Bible, is a horrible thing. That is the act of giving birth. The one thing that is standard and common in every culture is that women are the ones who give birth. And here is a story that actually says, well, it didn't start out that way. It started out with one man. It's from the man that a woman came. Afterwards, she gives birth. A little fishy over there. But what's not fishy is one man, one woman, they become one. Okay. What's the attitude towards monogamy or polygamy in Judaism? Yes and yes to both. There's the old joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. You're right, and you're right. The rabbi is trying to work out a dispute. This person tells him a story, says, you're right. The other one tells him a story, says, you're right. His wife says to him, how can you tell them they're both, you're right? He says, you're right too. We see the Jewish tradition is not really taking clear sides. Because in reality, the tradition is not made up of one author or one person. It's different views with different opinions. Let's take a look at human sexuality. The second section is it should be open or hidden. Open or hidden. So, in my notes, which you don't have, I made a point that Judaism had a tremendously strong influence on 2 major Western religions, Christianity and Islam. But in addition to influencing them and their births, they also Judaism was impacted by these religions. One of the impacts of Christianity was a less than open view about human sexuality. The very fact that celibacy is revered in Christianity, and that sex is employed for progeny, for having children, and the pleasure in it is officially downplayed, had an impact on Judaism, particularly in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, when Jewish legal codes were written, they developed a pretty hostile attitude towards human sexuality. The Chayyadam and the Code of Jewish Law talks about having sex in the dark. Husband and wife should make it a dark night, cover the windows, etc., which means they don't even look at each other in the nudity. We can see, if we take a look at ultra-Orthodox today, how women cover their hair and their arms and their legs, etc., not to be seen by other men, because those are sexual attributes which could attract a man who's other than their own wife, other than their own husband, and they could lead to adultery and so on. So that became the reason for really covering up the body. But whatever the reasons are, covering up the body becomes a way of repressing sexual desire, or at least attempting to repress it. It results in people in Israel tearing down advertisements from bus stops that show a girl in a bathing suit, and now even the point of where it shows a girl under any circumstances, there's hostility towards it. So they developed that strain. Was that the way Judaism was traditionally and originally? Not really. The Bible has an entire book of erotica, an entire book of sexual excitement and passion. It's called Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. That's what we're going to read next. Okay. This book is usually read with melody. That's one of the reasons it's called the Song of Songs. And it is a practice to read it on Friday night before a couple goes to bed. It's a Jewish aphrodisiac. It's to encourage sexual activity and excitement, especially for husband and wife who may be married long enough to be bored with each other, to renew the excitement and the passion. And I'm telling you, if they read it to each other with feeling, it works. It is an aphrodisiac in the sense that it heightens one's sensitivity. So, I'm going to read it, but without a melody, okay? Number 2, human sexuality. It's a conversation between a man and a woman, and probably more than just one conversation. It looks like it's love poetry collected from like a bunch of love poems all put into one book. She says, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. He says, like a lily among thorns, so is my darling among the maidens. Like an apple tree among trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the youths. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my mouth, she says. A garden locked is my own, my bride, a fountain locked, a sealed up spring. Awake, O north wind, come, O south wind, blow upon my garden, she says, that its perfume may spread. Let my beloved come to his garden and enjoy its luscious fruits. I have come to my garden, my own, my bride. I have plucked my myrrh and spice, eaten my honey and honeycomb, drunk my wine and my milk. And then the narrator says, eat, lovers, and drink deep of love. She says, I was asleep, but my heart was wakeful. Hark, my beloved knocks. Let me in, my own, my darling, my faultless dove, for my head is drenched with dew, my locks with the damp of night. She says, I've taken off my robe. Was I to don it again? I had bathed my feet. Was I to soil them again? My beloved took his hand off the latch, and my heart was stirred for him. I rose to let in my beloved. My hands dripped myrrh, my fingers flowing myrrh. upon the handles of the boat. How lovely are your feet in sandals, he says, O daughter of nobles. Your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of a master's hand. Your navel is like a round goblet. Let mixed wine not be lacking. Your belly is like a heap of wheat, hedged about with lilies. Your breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like a tower of ivory. Your eyes like pools in Heshbon. By the gate of Bat Rabbin, your nose like the Lebanon tower that faces towards Damascus. Listen to this love poetry. They're comparing each other's physical features to cities. How fair you are, how beautiful, oh love with all its rapture. He says, your stately form is like the palm, your breasts are like clusters. I say, let me climb the palm, let me take hold of its branches, let your breasts be like clusters of grapes, your breath like the fragrance of apples, and your mouth like choicest wine. Let it flow to my beloved as new wine, gliding over the lips. I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. So, imagine people who read this. Are they going to go and tear down poster advertisements on a bus stop because somebody's wearing a bathing suit? No, the people who wrote this are filled with such tremendous passion, such erotica. They are so free in their mention of love and in their acts of love. You can't write this if you haven't experienced it. So, the big question is, what's this book doing in the Bible? Why is poetry like this? And this is just barely one chapter of a book with 6 chapters. What is it doing in the Bible? So you would expect that many, many people said it doesn't belong. Many people. The great sage Rabbi Akiva, first century sage, he says, oh no, it is the most sacred book of the Bible. What? This is sacred? He says, yes, you just don't understand it. You think of this as sex between men and women. This is the relationship between God and the people of Israel.
Yeah.
It's expressed in human sexual encounter. Now, was Rabbi Akiva what was the term? Anti-sex, oblivious to human sexuality? Not at all. Certainly not. He is aware of what this says, and the kinds of people who wrote this poetry. But he wanted to make sure that they don't tear down the poster. And how do you do that? He says, no, it's a holy book. It's about God and Israel. Mm-hmm. And he keeps it in. Why did he keep it in? Why was he so supportive? Maybe because you don't get rid of books once they make it into the canon of biblical literature. Maybe because he actually saw the relationship of God to people in those human sexual encounter terms of men and women, husband, wives, lovers with each other. For whatever his reasons, he appreciated the sexuality and he kept it in. I always wonder about people who have a repressed sense of sexuality, how they deal, and are very religious. How do they deal with this? How do they really deal with love poetry like this in the Bible? I don't know. If you have any comments, I'd like open discussion. If you have any thoughts, anything that you may want to say about what this says about Jewish attitudes, or what it says about human sexuality. If not, we're going to go on to number 3. I said the first one you're going to like, the second one is this you'll love, and the third one is very exciting.
What were the arguments of those who wanted this chapter out of the Bible? How did they explain? Was it a mistake somehow to happen to have the Song of Songs in the Bible? On what basis they demanded to remove it?
Actually, there really wasn't a debate about whether it should be taken out of the Bible, because the biblical canon, which was formed over actually a few centuries, accepted books not because of their theme alone, but because of their antiquity. The older it was, the more well-known it was amongst the people, the more it had a right to be regarded as sacred. And if it was new, even if it was profoundly religious, if it was new, it didn't make it into this canon of biblical literature, this collection of sacred texts. The older things were, the more sacred they were. The newer they were, the less sacred they were. So all texts were ascribed to great heroes of the past. So the Song of Songs was attributed to King Solomon. The tradition began to say, who else could have written anything like this except a man who had sex every night since he was bar mitzvah? Only Solomon had 1,000 wives. So he was the author who wrote this. So they were ascribing this to antiquity. The Zohar, the main book of the Kabbalistic literature, was written, I think it was in the 14th century Spain, or something like that, by a scribe who made a living copying texts. And he wrote the Zohar on his own. But he realized that he couldn't sell it if he was selling his own book. So he began to market it as a copy of a copy of a copy that was written by Rabbi Shimon ben Zakkai almost 1,400 years earlier. And he wrote it in Aramaic, which was not the language of the Jews in Spain. It was the language in the ancient Jewish community in the early centuries. And he marketed it, and it was very, very popular. And his wife said, from a conversation that was written by a traveler who stayed with them, recorded in his travelogue, a conversation between the husband and wife, the scribe and his wife. And he said, the wife said to him, why don't you tell everybody you wrote it? Everybody thinks it's wonderful. I want to be married to a famous man. And he said, shh, if I tell people I wrote it, no one's going to buy it. So the antiquity kept things in the Bible. That's why we have more than one description of the birth of the world, of the creation of the world. And you're going to see in a moment, because that's the third part, of the creation of women. There are 2 different versions of creation in the Torah. Completely different versions. Completely different.
I'm
Why
sorry.
do they both
Two?
exist?
Just 2.
Yeah, only two.
2 versions, right?
Only 2, but 2 different versions.
Okay.
Chapter 1 and chapter 2, they're next to each other. Why are they both in there? Because they were both stories of different elements of the community. And the scribes did not dismiss things that were old. They put them both in. And where they could, they tried to sew them together like a quilt. But you can see where the threads are. So in the first story of creation, it's not like the one we read. The first story of creation, everybody thinks of as the creation story, where the world is created in 6 days. And it starts with light and darkness and dry land and oceans, and it takes the 4th day till the sun and the moon are created, and then plants and fish and birds and animals, and at the end of the 6th day, human being created after everything. The story in the 2nd chapter that we actually read, that you read, that story says, this is the story of the creation of the world on the day that the Lord God created the heaven, the Lord God created the earth. There was nothing on the earth because God did not plant anything because there was no man to take care of it. So God created the man first and then created the trees and the bushes and and then after all that, he saw the man was lonely, so he created animals. The first chapter has the man created last, after the animals, and the animals after the trees. In the second one, the trees are first, the animals, the man is first, the trees come next, and then the animals. And it's not one day, it's not 6 days, it's just 1 day. And the biggest change is women. In the 2nd chapter that we read, the man is created, the woman comes from his rib. Sasha pointed out, the man is dominant. He is the main figure. She's the helpmate. Okay, let's take a look at the first chapter. This is on page 4. Do we have another reader?
Julian.
Julian, you want to do it?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. And God said, let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth.
So everything is created already, and God said, let's make man in our image, after our likeness, to rule, to take care of everything. So the human being is last, not first. This is the end of the 6th day. Go ahead.
And God created humankind in the divine image, creating in the image of God, creating them male and female.
That's the key. That in the creation of humanity, God creates them both simultaneously, male and female. Not the man first and the woman comes from his rib, but they're created equally. And by the way, that's the story with the creation of all the animals. Created animals, male and female, he created them. Male and female. And including the description of humanity. And go ahead.
Lilith, the wife who insisted on equality. From Otzar Midrashim, the Aleph, Bet of Ben Sira, the holy...
No. But before that, God bless them.
Oh, sorry. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth.
Okay, so, based on that version of creation, what's the relationship between male and female?
Sex.
They're created at the same
They're
time,
equal.
and they're both
Yeah.
given the same instruction, right?
Yeah.
Which is, together, you rule the earth.
Yeah.
So what word would describe their relationship? Equality,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we have a problem. The sages, later on, after this Bible is canonized, etc., they have a problem. Chapter 1 says they're created equally. Chapter 2 says the man is created first, and then comes the woman. Which is it? Well, it's got to be both true, because this is the Torah. This is God's Word. This is the sacred scripture. They're both true. How can they both be true? So they came up with a very ingenious solution to this contradiction. A summary of the solution. Adam, the first man, had 2 wives. The first wife was his equal. She was created at the same time he was, given the same responsibilities, the same chores. She was his equal. And he and she fought like the Dickens. I'm going to read this because it's a lot, I want to get through it. When the Holy One, this is, by the way, from a midrash, legends about the Bible from that began in the 1st century in the Common Era, or even earlier, and went all the way on. The midrash continues today. But its main period was in the first 5-6 centuries of the Common Era, and also added on, particularly during the Middle Ages and so on. Okay, this is an early one. When the Holy One Blessed created the first Adam alone, they said, that's a typographical error. It's he said. It is not good for this Adam to be alone. He then created a woman for Adam from the earth, as he had created him for himself, and called her Lilith. Meaning they were created equally because they were both created from the earth soil, not the woman from his rib. But he created a man from the clay in the earth, and now he says, I should also create a female form, and he creates a woman from the clay in the earth. And he called her Lilith. Adam and Lilith immediately began to fight. She said, I will not lie below. And he said, I will not lie beneath you, but only on top. For you are fit only to be on the bottom position, while I am to be the superior one. Lilith responded, get out of here, you Meshuggah. We are equal to each other, inasmuch as we were both created from the earth. But they would not listen to one another. When Lilith saw this, she pronounced the ineffable name and flew away into the air. Okay, so what do we have here? The first woman is a woman named Lilith, not Eve. She is created as an equal to man, from the same substance. And they can't get along, because you can't have 2 captains of the same ship, the author believes. So they're fighting. How is the fighting expressed? Does she say, I'm in charge of watering and I want you to do the digging? No. She says, I'll gather I'll go hunting and you do the cooking? No. How do they express their fight with each other? How do they express their fight with each other? She says, I'm going to be on top. When we're having sex. He says, no, I'm going to be on top. I'm superior to you. She says, you're not superior to me. So the battle of the sexes is also a battle for power and control in the relationship. And what happens is, according to this midrash, this legend, she leaves, means she divorces him. She gets out of the relationship. Now, the name Lilith actually appears in the Bible. It's early on, but not in this capacity. It seems to be the name of a demonic female figure, at least in later ages, later centuries, a demon, female demon, who makes trouble, serious trouble. She, when somebody gives birth, they have a baby, they're afraid that the baby is going to die, so they get an amulet that they have for protection. It's against Lilith. Why? Because Lilith, what she wants is, she's so angry about Adam taking a second wife that's subservient. Maybe she's angry at the woman for being subservient, or she's angry at Adam, or angry at God. She's angry. So she goes around trying to kill little babies. So they develop these legends that the amulets that we have, and you're right, may Lilith have no power over this baby, or may Lilith have no power over this bride, or may Lilith have no power over this pregnant woman, all to save him from Lilith, who actually wants to bring death upon children, or beautiful brides, or pregnant women, so they should die in childbirth and so on. And she became a very, very negative figure. We find her in other ancient Near Eastern cultures. She was not relegated to the Jewish culture. And she has in different cultures, she has different characteristics. But in the Jewish tradition, she became Adam's first wife that they split up. I want to read you a little more about this. Into the next paragraph, second paragraph from the bottom. According to Genesis Rabbah is the name of an early midrash. It goes back to about the 1st or 2nd century. Adam was disgusted upon seeing the first woman full of discharge and blood. And God had to provide him with another one, meaning another woman. The subsequent creation, meaning the second woman, is performed with adequate proportions. Adam is made to sleep, so as not to witness the process itself. What's the process he doesn't witness? The formation of this woman. Taking a rib, bone, flesh, and blood, and making a person. It's filled with blood and discharge. It's very reminiscent of birth. Giving a birth, bloody, etc. So the man is disgusted by that. So God puts him to sleep. He gets anesthesia, so he doesn't have to see the blood in the operating room. And what happens? Eve is brought to him adorned with fine jewelry and brought to Adam by the angels Gabriel and Michael. She becomes the symbol of beauty, but she is not fighting for equality. Despite the terseness of the biblical text in this regard, that is, despite the short description, the erotic iniquities attributed to Eve constitute a separate category of her shortcomings. Told in Genesis 3:16, in the Torah itself it says that her punishment for giving Adam the fruit of the forbidden tree is that your desire shall be for your husband, even though you will have pain in childbirth, meaning you will be screaming when you're giving birth, I will never get pregnant again, no more sex, nothing, I will not go through this. Still, the punishment is your desire will be for your husband. She is therefore accused by the rabbis of having an overdeveloped sexual drive. That is quoting this from Genesis Rabbah, chapter 20, verse 7. This is an early midrash. And she is accused of constantly enticing Adam. However, in terms of textual popularity and dissemination, the motif of Eve copulating with the primeval serpent takes priority of our other sexual transgressions. What is this saying? That the second woman, Eve, she is not seen in glowing terms either. The first one was fighting for equality. The second one is oversexed. Not according to the Torah. In the Bible, there is no first one, and there is nothing about oversexed Eve. But the rabbinic literature from the first century on conveys attitudes that affect Judaism, and we are more a product of the rabbinic thought than we are of the ancient scriptural Torah. You can see that we're not a product of that, the Song of Songs. We don't go around, talking about your breasts are like the mounds of Gilead, and that's true. So what we see is that women in both situations are found fault with. Either she is the oversexed Eve, or she is the demanding, fighting, controversial Lilith. The last thing I have to say about this is that in the 1960s, when the feminist movement really took off, they developed a Jewish form of feminism. And Jewish feminists began to write articles and make claims about the right of equality, etc. And it was collected into a magazine which was published every month. What did they name the magazine? Lilith.
Oh.
That's the name of the magazine. They reclaimed this demonic figure because no matter what the rabbis wanted to say about her, the feminists said, right on. You wanted equality. You want your opportunity to be on top. Go for it, girl. So, that is the third aspect of sex in Judaism. We are, first and foremost, monogamous, polygamous, both. We are, second, open about sexuality, but also embarrassed and repressed, both. And at the same time, the relationship with the status of women is fight for equality, but they're dangerous. All they think about is sex. Both. That's my answer to sex in Judaism. I'm open to any questions, any comments you may have, anything you want to say about this.
Please, come on.
You don't have to have anything to say. Yeah, please.
Rabbi
I don't hear, so if you come closer,
Rabbi
much better for me.
As a rabbi, I want to ask you about the women rabbis, your colleagues.
About women, female rabbis.
Female rabbis, yes.
A very good point.
I just,
Very good
not from sexuality point,
Immediately
but
something came to mind that I'd never thought of before. The resistance to accepting women to become rabbis in the Jewish community must have a lot of similarities with the prohibition of women becoming priests in the Catholic Church, and also women having places of authority in other, in Mormonism and other religious traditions.
And Islam too.
I mean, I think we all can have ideas as to why men hold on to that office and don't let women in. But I think that what we could comment on is how that process has changed so rapidly. Today, there are more women going into the rabbinate than men. The rabbinical schools outside the Orthodox, actually there is a rabbinical school for women, an Orthodox rabbinical school, but the majority of the Orthodox world doesn't accept it, but it exists, and they are actually graduating some brilliant scholars who can hold a candle in their learning to any man, and they are actually becoming, finding a place of authority even in the Orthodox world. And there are one or two positions where Orthodox communities have taken on the female rabbis that have been ordained in this institution, in giving them positions of authority. I'm not sure exactly how much authority, but it's a process. But in the non-Orthodox world, the conservative, the reform, the reconstructionist, the renewal movements, the majority of graduating ordained people are women. The same is true as the cantors. In the cantors training schools, more women are becoming cantors than men. And I remember back in the 1970s, when the question arose about admitting women to the rabbinical school of the conservative movement, where I belong, that the ones who were most against it were the cantors, male cantors, and their argument was they could not argue against female cantors on Jewish law, because there's no prohibition there really. Their argument was, they were saying to the rabbis, we warn you, if you let women become cantors, they will take your jobs. You will see that you will be fighting for positions, you rabbis. And that's why we won't let them in to the cantorial association. But that stuck for only one generation. By the next generation, they were in both rabbinical school and the cantorial school. I personally see, this is anecdotal, but I see women are actually, have begun to dominate positions of authority in the Jewish community. Executive directors in synagogues, CEOs of Jewish institutions, Jewish community centers, fundraising. More and more women are taking positions of authority, where I think now, it seems to be, it might already be a majority. I live in California, Barbara and I are from San Francisco, so it's a more forward-thinking or liberal community that I suspect on the East Coast in New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, it's not like that. But that's only because it takes them 10 years to catch up with us. And by that time we're gone. Yeah.
Is it the same situation in Israel?
In Israel. I believe not at all. It's a very good point. I'm glad you raised that. I think that in Israel, where the conservative movement has a rabbinical school and the reform movement has a rabbinical school, there are women in these rabbinical schools, but I don't think they have job opportunities like they do in the United States. I think the Israeli community in the conservative movement is much more conservative, and the reform movement is always fighting for its legitimacy. And that legitimacy is represented by the official religious authority in Israel, which is dominated by the Orthodox. In the United States, Judaism is not dominated by the Orthodox, but in Israel, the Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionists, they're minuscule compared to the Orthodox. The Orthodox are all paid from taxes. Synagogues are built with government money, and salaries are paid for things.
And the Orthodox, they came from this part of the world.
The Orthodox are coming from
this part of...
from this part?
Yeah, or from so-called...
East.
Litvak.
Yeah, east.
The Orthodox in Israel are coming from the Baltic states?
No, from East.
East Europe.
Eastern
From
Europe.
Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
You mean generations before?
Well, I'm
Yeah.
asking, who are the Orthodox?
Yes.
Are they from here or from the US?
Interestingly enough, the Orthodox got their power because the non-Orthodox, the secular community, particularly in Israel, felt pity for them following the Holocaust, because they were so destroyed, so many were put to death, that the secular community in Israel gave them some authority just as for pity. We're going to put them in charge of personal status. We're going to let them decide matters of religious law. How much longer are they going to be around? We live in a modern world. The kibbutz is an example of where we're headed. Technology, science, university, Hebrew University, Technion, etc. We'll give these people, we feel bad for them. They tried so hard to stay alive, and they were the first ones that the Nazis and their collaborators picked out. So they gave them the power. And today, they're not a small group anymore, with an average of 8 or 10 children per family. They are growing exponentially. They are making very strong demands. And demands based on God is on our side, so we know what's right and what's authentic Judaism, and all this other stuff is not authentic. And who knows what the future is for Judaism in Israel. Those of us who live in the United States and England, in other Western cultures, are often told by the Israelis, had been told by the Israelis, you wait, you Jews in the diaspora, you're going to assimilate, you're going to disappear. In 50 years you'll be gone. We, in Israel, is where Judaism is going to survive, and you better come now. Well, I'm not so sure. Israel, I believe, will survive. I'm not so sure how Judaism is going to do in Israel, because it's certainly not the kind of Judaism that many of us think is really the natural, organic, evolutionary development of the religious civilization. Those of us who do not see Judaism as fixed and fossilized, but as dynamic, do not look to the Orthodox form as dynamic for survival. But who knows? We can't predict anything. That which
So why is it like that?
Why is it like that?
Yeah.
I think that you're getting a little bit into the lecture that if we're still going to do it, Jonas asked me to speak, I think, on Thursday, yes? I'm going to want to speak about the divergence of the Jewish people in Israel and the divergence of the Jewish people in the diaspora. I see our going in two different directions. And I'm going to reveal now about central theme of what I have to say Thursday, but I believe it comes from the fact that Israel is living in a Holocaust mentality. That doesn't mean the gravestones in Prague or cemeteries in Lithuania. What I mean by that is immediately after the Holocaust, the shock of the Jewish people is that the most horrible, inhumane thing ever recorded in history happened, and the civilized world did nothing. Yeah. They stood by and let it happen or helped it happen. So we cannot count on them. We cannot count on anybody else. We can only count on ourselves, and that means, since the threats are existential, life or death, we have to be strong and tough. That mentality survived in Israel because Israel became the settling place for so many survivors, but also nurtured by the neighborhood of countries around Israel saying, we're going to throw you into the sea. Jews in the diaspora, also the Holocaust had an impact, but the non-Jews stopped being thought of as our enemies. It came up again in France, but it's because of the Arabs. It's it's because of the influx of these North African Arabs and Muslims, or the Iraq and etc. refugees. But in general, before this recent development of immigrants, the attitude in the diaspora was, the non-Jews are not our enemies. They may not be our friends, but they're not our enemies. And then you have President Clinton's daughter marrying a Jewish guy, a Russian immigrant to the United States, and Time magazine has a picture of the wedding. He has a talit on. Time magazine, President's son-in-law. Trump's daughter goes and marries an Orthodox Jewish guy. Mark Zuckerberg goes and comes up with Facebook. Steven Spielberg is making movies. So all of a sudden, being Jewish is not a shame. It's something you can even be proud of. And you find that we just came from the Czech Republic. The leadership was telling us how many Czechs are talking about, they'll come to and they'll say something. I discovered that I have a Jewish grandmother. I discovered that I have a Jewish parent. That there's a pride in that connection. So in the diaspora, we don't have the sense that they're threatening us. If we disappear, it'll be because of assimilation, not because of hatred and destruction. That's the longing from Israel. Yeah, look at the white supremacists and anti-Semitism. I stand in the minority that's not afraid of anti-Semitism in places like the United States, and in Canada, and in England, and in Sweden, and other places like that. In addition, by not being afraid of the non-Jewish community, we have also moved with them towards becoming progressive and liberal and concerned about the downtrodden, the oppressed, black people, brown people, poor people, etc. So it's unlike the Israeli mentality of survival, that's the purpose of Judaism in a Jewish state. We have to have a Jewish state to survive. So we have to be strong and tough. In the diaspora, we're saying the purpose of Judaism in a Jewish state is to show the greatness and the beauty of Judaism and its values. That we want to be a light unto the nations. We want to be an example of how to be good. And they're moving in different directions. The Palestinians come in and the Israelis say, to hell with them. Every one of them has a knife. The Americans have said, you got to be nice to them. Ooh, different directions. I'm not saying which is right or wrong, because I believe, well, what I believe is what I was going to still say on Thursday night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I want to tell you the good news. Rimas, who filmed this,
Yes.
Gilbert says, can I put it up on YouTube?
Yeah.
I'm going to make of this a part of my lecture series to go all across the United States. Since I retired from the pulpit, I'm working more on disseminating lectures by Zoom. So at first when he said, give a talk on sex and Judaism, I said, hey. But now I'm really glad because this is my next my next in my lecture series.
And
I
wanted to add, but that friendship between Judaism and the rest of the world that Sacramento Kings now playing to Golden State Warriors, right?
Oh, how are they doing? Are they going to
Now equal. And Sacramento Kings has a Lithuanian basketball star Sabonis, who is marrying an Orthodox bride.
And he turned his religion into Judaism. He married a Jewish girl several years ago. They already expecting second child. So not long ago, there was news that he turned into Judaism. So for Lithuanians, basketball is our first religion.
Above football?
And
Basketball.
And then Sabonis is a very renowned name
It's
for
a saint,
basketball. Because his father was a famous basketball player as well, and
Also
this is
in
already
NBA.
his son, and he plays for NBA, and he turned into Judaism. So that was, and we had in the main media, the
He's
tall
turned
guy
in.
and Orthodox Jewish
I will show you the
rabbi.
picture.
Wow.
I will show you the picture.
Show me the picture,
This
yeah.
is a big thing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but
So
also
the bonds, Lithuania and American Jews is growing closer.
Yeah, and one saint of the first religion, basketball, that converts into Judaism. And there's another trend actually. You said it generally that Israelis like preserving the memory of Holocaust, etc., etc. There's that movie Unorthodox,
Yes.
about the girl who escaped from Williamsburg Hasid
Oh, yes.
community, and she meets Israeli singers, musicians from Israel. And she's asking them, don't you care about Holocaust and sort of restoring the statistics, the number, by having many children and so on? And the answer from those Israelis musicians is, no, we don't think very much about the past. We're thinking how to preserve the state of Israel today.
Yeah.
Because it's surrounded by
Right, right. That's a good example of that mentality, that even people that you would think would have be more progressive, no, and that concept is growing in Israel. We have to be strong, preserve, hold on, and then be strong.
But in America too, like Williamsburg ultra-Orthodox community.
But that's minority of the Jewish community. I mean, Williamsburg is minority of the whole Jewish community in the United States.
But it's typical of the ultra-Orthodox in the United States. And there are towns outside of New York, but close, suburban towns, bedroom communities outside of New York, that have taken over, the ultra-Orthodox have taken over the legislature in those towns. They are using the tax money for their yeshivot and their schools and their children and so on. And they're not teaching math and science and English and so on. And there are now a lot of classes.
But Moshe, going back to the male and female roles.
Yeah.
From your personal perspective, and I know you will be very politically correct, but try to
Don't be so sure.
So, I think you have lived a very full life, a long life as well.
Yes.
How do you see yourself? Did your views change regarding male, female roles in a family, in a society? In a community, in business, in politics, and how do you, if you could share with us, have you changed at all? Have your views changed at all from, in your long life?
It's a good question. A personal question, but it's a good question. I grew up in the Orthodox world. And the value that I grew up with, how I interpreted what was being shared with me, is that men are superior to women. Boys are superior to girls. That was communicated religiously, as well as culturally in part of America as well, in the 1950s, but let's stay with the Jewish influence. Not only did the men only have all the leadership roles, they were only male rabbis, only male cantors, only male officiants at services, only male members in the organizations and the politics, etc. The women who wanted to be active and had the skills would have separate organizations called the Ladies Auxiliary helpers. They were not the ones who made policy. Secondly, early on in my life, I was taught that men are superior, boys are superior, because by the 4th or 5th grade, boys would be introduced to the Talmud. Girls stayed with intellectually lower level studies. They continued to study Bible, which was seen as stories, or and Talmud, especially with Lithuanian, Litvak perspective, the Talmud was what sharpened your mind and made you brilliant. And to be eligible for that brilliancy, you had to be smart. And girls could not aspire to that. Not just that they were restricted. The assumption was they didn't have what it took to be able to grasp these sophisticated intellectual ideas in the 5th grade. So that made a very important statement to me. And thirdly, we were taught that there are many, many commandments of rituals. All of them are incumbent upon men. Women have much fewer commandments to observe. And they're mainly the prohibitions. You cannot murder, you cannot steal, you can't eat pork, you cannot do this and that. But the doing things were the men's obligation. Women, they didn't have to. Why? Because they had other responsibilities. What? The kitchen and the bedroom. That was their responsibility. Raise the children, feed the family, and have more children. So I grew up with that, even though we were what's called modern Orthodox, not ultra-Orthodox. Modern Orthodox. It was still the same values.
In the family as well?
That was typical of, in my family, all the families around me, and my own relatives, etc. I did in later years, and I'll tell you in a moment exactly when, but in later years I began to be uncomfortable with 3 aspects of orthodoxy, which is why when I decided to go to rabbinical school, I went to the conservative movement, not the Orthodox. I did not feel comfortable with the Orthodox attitudes towards Gentiles. Just like men were superior to women, Jews were superior to Gentiles. And I couldn't feel comfortable with that value. I could not feel comfortable with the treatment of women in the Jewish community as second class. And I couldn't be comfortable with the search for truth. Because on the one hand, Judaism was teaching me to have a sharp mind that was going to ask questions, to question every axiom. And at the same time, there were certain things you couldn't question. Not many, mainly one. Well, really, God exists and he's Jewish, meaning God is male and he has selected this chosen people. He chose a people. And what I was taught about God conflicted with this idea that God is this male, throne-sitting, old guy with a beard, preferring one group out of all humanity, and I was not comfortable with it. The breaking point was when my first child was born. The doctor told my wife and myself, after the test, and so on, oh, you're gonna have a baby boy. Well, how do you know? It has a male heartbeat. Well, I want you to know that I have at least 3 daughters with male heartbeats. Because when the doctor, they didn't let us into the room at the time. When the doctor came out of the living room, holding this thin, long, skinny child and said, would you like to hold your daughter? I thought, who was he talking to? I'm gonna have a son. And I became the father of 5 daughters. It became impossible for me to continue to think of the supremacy of male over female. I saw a difference between boys and girls. I saw how I was as one of 3 sons and how my daughters were, but it wasn't higher or lower. It was different qualities. But I completely deleted this inequality. At the same time, I deleted my concepts of Jews being a chosen people and better than Gentiles. Because when my daughter was born, I finished rabbinical school simultaneously, and I was sent by the Air Force to Vietnam. During the Vietnam War, sent to Thailand. I came to a Buddhist country, and all of a sudden I began to meet millions of people who never heard that we were the chosen people. I expected them all to go, oh, you're Jewish? Oh, can I They didn't know, they didn't care. And what was most shocking, they got along very well without us. They didn't have the Torah, they didn't have Shabbat, they didn't have kosher restaurants, and they were just doing just fine. They had holidays, respect for their elders, honesty, integrity, intelligence, culture, laughter, song, music, grief, they knew it all. That was the end of my triumphalism, it's called in theological circles. This idea that one group has triumphs over everybody else. So that was the end of my feeling that I'm better by being Jewish and better by being male. And it wasn't long after that that I stopped thinking of God in like a computer programmer, or like some master puppeteer running the universe. It became childish, and the more I studied in rabbinical school, the more I learned of the origins of religions, not just my own, and the development of the idea of God. And I began to realize in the pre-scientific world that made sense. I don't live in the pre-scientific world. It doesn't make sense anymore. And that was the end.
But then you go back and, in Jewish tradition, family, your community is very important.
Yes.
So if you grow up with certain values within a family, which is your closest, right? You say you have these discoveries as you grow up as a man yourself and you have your own family, but you still have your community. How do you continue with the conversation?
Okay. Yeah, that is a good question as well. And I'll tell you, it's a very important question. Because at that point, I think that I was at a crossroads, but I didn't realize it. Which is, Why continue to be a rabbi? Why continue my concept of God kind of flipped?
But aren't
Traditions of the role of man, of a woman, Jews being chosen people, etc. is gone. Why do it? Because at the same time that I learned of the evolution of human thought, I also learned of the evolution of Judaism, meaning that we may be the people of Abraham and Sarah and Moses and so on, but our Judaism is not the same Judaism they had, because it's been constantly changing, not just changing, but also always constantly trying to get better, to work at the rough spots. So I began to see my role as actually cleaning up some of the mistakes or the problems or the errors. I don't know, maybe I should call them mistakes and errors. Making Judaism more relevant, more meaningful, more honest. So instead of leaving the rabbinate, I ended up in those early years becoming one of the people on the cutting edge. My congregation, my first congregation, was the first one in the United States for women to wear the talit and to read from the Torah.
But Moshe, that's very good. But at the same time, your family, not the family that you have your children with, but your Orthodox family, because that's the community.
You mean
how do you then communicate? How do you, keep the contact and keep the conversation
Keep the
going
ties.
when you grow up with the Orthodox family, right? And it's very important, like all of us, family ties, and then you kind of go towards another.
Right.
But I do believe you have the conversation and you have the ties, and my question is, how do you keep the conversation going? I do understand this enlightenment that you have, very good, but then, Plato's kind of...
But are you thinking of it like the movie Unorthodox?
No,
You're not?
I'm thinking
Okay.
just in general, because in any kind of enlightenment, right? That when you have to go back and keep, and because in some cultures, family is not as tight, is not as important. But in Jewish tradition, I think the family and the community is very important. So you cannot just say, okay, I think when we share Žydų stories, the family, who cares? I'm the enlightened one, so I'm going on my individual path. But I think in Jewish tradition, you don't do that.
Okay.
So you feel the enlightenment while continuing the conversation with the...
Okay, it's a very good, another good point you're making. You're helping me also appreciate and understand myself better. That question is most meaningful if my family and my world was ultra-Orthodox, like Williamsburg or Muncie or Mea Shearim in Jerusalem and so on. Because then my movement would be a break from and a separation from them. But I never was a part of that kind of a community. Actually, as a teenager, I toyed with it a little bit, but not much. The hormones were running, and it didn't stick with that long. My family, actually, my cousins, aunts, uncles, etc., were part, and my parents, my teachers, my friends, were part of the modern Orthodox world. That was people who were observant, kept kosher and Shabbat and wore kippah and things like that, but who were acculturated in the modern world. We dressed like other teenagers. We listened to rock and roll. We went to movies. We ate pizza, but it was kosher pizza, not pepperoni and cheese. We kept Shabbat, but when Shabbat was over, we went to Sweet 16 parties and danced. So that wasn't just me and my family. That was probably the majority of the Orthodox after the Holocaust. My family has gone in 3 directions. My brothers and I are all in the same type now. My youngest brother Norman, remember he was here, became president of his conservative synagogue. And my brother Howard, who was in Israel, lives an Orthodox lifestyle because he's in Israel. His wife is Orthodox and there's not much of an alternative. But when he comes to us, when he's away from home, he's just the way we are, and I think even a little bit when his wife isn't looking. You don't have that on tape, do you know? Anyway, quite a number of people in my family are part of that same movement that we had growing up that kept modernizing, and that became very acceptably part of the conservative movement, not quite reform. Part of it became more Orthodox, or stayed Orthodox, and another part did not remain observant at all. So I would say that my brothers and I didn't leave a world that had a grip with guilt and so on.
But what women's roles?
And when we are back with each other, even with those who remained Orthodox, our form of Judaism has earned their respect because they see the intellectual honesty and integrity that we have. The ones who remained Orthodox, I don't think are Orthodox so much because of what they believe, but because they really appreciate the practices and the observances and their Orthodox communities. So they don't look down on us, and we.
And you don't try to change that.
No.
You just keep
no.
the conversation.
The one person that was trying to change me was my mother, and this is what she used to say. Martin. It's interesting, she never called me by my Hebrew name. She was very Orthodox. But I mean, modern Orthodox too. She says, Martin, what would your father say if he saw that you were driving a car on Shabbat? What would your father say if he saw you putting on the lights, etc.? Because my father was more observant. He was and I knew the answer to that. And it was different from what my mother thought. I wish that my father had lived long enough to see me emerge as a person in the Jewish community who lives the Jewish life, but hasn't given up critical thinking, and is growing in ways that my Orthodox relatives and the relatives are not going. They are the same. The ones who are Orthodox are living life like they grew up in Brooklyn. I'm not. But I'm not, it hasn't been thrown away. It's that I've extracted from it what was beautiful and cherished, and I've gone further from that.
But I remember you telling the story how your mom came to California and was showed a Jewish museum.
Yeah.
And there
Sasha, thank you very, very much. Really grateful. She made this whole thing possible. Thank
See
you.
you
Thank you.
on Thursday.
We wish you and your family the very, very best wishes as you go back to Ukraine,
Thank you.
and that your father, who is fighting for freedom and so many important values, should be safe and return to stay with his family for many, many years to come.
Thank you, Moshe.
Please tell him that the people in Lithuania support him very strongly.
I will. He knows it. Thank
And
you
in
so much.
America.
See you. Bye.
So maybe the last question about that your mom's trip
Yeah.
to the Jewish Museum in California.
Yeah. My mother came to, when I was rabbi in Los Angeles, it was in the 1970s. My father already died in 1964, so she came in the 70s, and I took her on a tour of the city and so on. I was a rabbi of a pretty traditional synagogue, big synagogue in West Hollywood and so on. And I took her to the largest Reform temple, Wilshire Boulevard Temple, a big, enormous place, seated like 2,000 people, etc. And it was led by a Reform rabbi who was, in the classic Reform tradition, very much against Jewish practices like kosher and wearing a talit or a kippah or anything like that. He wouldn't do any of that. And his name was Edgar Magnin, and he remained the rabbi of that one synagogue for over 60 years, and he ruled it with an iron hand. And he was so anti-Jewish traditions like Lithuanian and Polish traditions that he was called by his own congregants not Rabbi Magnin, but they used to joke and call him Cardinal Magnin, that he was more Catholic than the Catholics. So we went to the synagogue, and because I wanted to see murals, he had mosaics, the history of Judaism, from Abraham, went all the way to Moses, Maimonides, Baron Hirsch, Rothschild, etc., and it ended with his synagogue, not Israel. So we're going through the halls, and there are glass shelves. They made like a museum on the walls, and in this behind the glass is a talit and kippah and tefillin and kiddush cups and things like that. But it was obvious these are the things that the Jews used to have. It was like lahavdil, what was done in collecting things in the 1930s and 40s and bring them to a museum in Czechoslovakia. This is what the Jews used to have too. And there my mother sees things that we use at home in a museum as if it was past. She was in shock. And all of a sudden, Cardinal Magnin comes walking in the hall. And he knew me because when I first came from Los Angeles as a young rabbi, he greeted me and he gave me advice how to succeed as a rabbi. He said to me, in rabbinical school they taught you to be a scholar and a teacher. Wrong. If you want to succeed, you have to be a lion tamer. And you just whip them into place. That was it. So he's walking in the hallway and he says, "Oh, Martin Levin, come, how are you?" I said, "Fine, Rabbi Magnin, this is my mother's visit." "No, oh, come into my office, I'd like to meet you and say hello, etc." We come in to sit down, and the first thing my mother says is, "I want you to know that I'm Orthodox." And he says, "Oh, very interesting." And he presses the buzzer on his telephone, and he says to his secretary, "Mary, I'm ready for lunch." could you order a ham sandwich with cheese, please? I think that's what he ordered. So that was my mother's experience. So she had, a part of the Orthodox thinking was that if you don't remain Orthodox, you'll end up having a ham sandwich and putting Jewish objects, in a museum. I think the opposite is true. I think that if you fossilize Judaism and don't let it grow and evolve, you'll turn it into a museum. Anyway, I want to know who these people are.
So
Please, could you